to our second call of November. Today, the focus will be on getting set and sort of setting our pathway for agreement on an exposure draft related to conforming amendment to the IAASB's other standards due to changes arise from the approval of the 3 quality management standards in September. I sent a note out to everyone last night. We had a slight change in what we're trying to accomplish today, only because we did get, I would call them necessarily fully substantive comments, but enough comments that we did not want to, that would have required probably a turnaround draft to you. And we did not want to send a turnaround draft on short notice. And so without upsetting the time schedule, I think we could agree on the basic principles of the project proposal, proposed effective dates, and have any substantive comments dealt with on this call related to conforming amendments. Then the other thing we can do is provide maybe a few extra days if you felt rushed. We know there's a lot out there for you to review right now, including the basis for conclusions. We've tried to figure out a way to phase things, yet get everything done before year end. It's just really, we're constrained by the schedule. So things that we could push off, like the approval of the exposure draft, we tried to push off without having a serious impact to our calendar. So that's where we are right now. Planning committee could also discuss how, when, and if it is possible to elongate some of the reviews in the future. But that explains where we are today. And then one other thing I'd want to say is last night I wrote to the board. We've had a number of comments, not excluding board members, because board members have raised this too. Is there a possibility of giving a couple more weeks for our discussion paper in relation to the fraud and going concern, just to give people a little bit more time post-holiday period to respond? And the staff team and I suggested that we move our discussion comment deadline to the 1st of February from January 12th. I think that would be a meaningful relief without, again, changing our long-term timetable on that project. Before we move to the substance of today's discussion, I just wanted to make sure that the board thought that was a good idea. I see a lot of nods. So Vili, I think we could go ahead and announce it on our website, via Twitter, so other social media, LinkedIn. But it's also important. Obviously, we depend upon you and your network of contacts to highlight that we're moving it back to February 1st. And by the way, thank you, Bev and Angela, for being able to accommodate that move. So thank you. Does anyone have any concerns about the revised plan for today? And again, it was an effort to give you a little bit of relief. I know it just was a 90-page document sent back in red line. While it probably wasn't hugely substantive changes, was enough that you probably would have had to take a close look at everything again. Josephine?
I don't have any concerns per se, Tom. I was just a little bit worried by your email, because it implied that there were so many that, and you say they're not substantial, but certainly we wouldn't want to have another draft that then potentially undermines or oversimplifies what Brett has already put through, and that's just the only thing that I'm slightly anxious about.
Brett will give a little bit more detail. It was just enough that the staff had to really consider each one more time, and we ran out of hours, and we did not want to send a turnaround draft late at night going into this call. And again, it's really, we didn't think that it was any loss to actually do the formal approval at the end of January. We were basically getting the same exposure drift out. We imagine we could turn it around quite quickly. It just was the idea of not being so chaotic on your calendars. It given you a sense of obligation of having to read 90 pages in 25 minutes before this call. If that makes sense to, so I think, Brett, did I get that right too? That's how you would characterize it. Okay.
Thank you.
Okie doke. Let's get going. Brett, I turn it over to you to and by the way, I do think I'm going to make up my deficit in time for you today. So let me keep my promise, Lord. So, Brett.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, as Tom said, I'll get to the exposure draft in a moment, but we do want to try to knock off as many of the ancillary tasks as we can at this call. We want to make the best use of the time that we have. So the first thing we'll be turning to is the project proposal. Before I get into that, I did just want to say thank you to a few people. Obviously, the process of preparing these conforming amendments is obviously not just me. There's many people involved, most particularly the QM staff, often operating as a sounding board. They're all very busy at the moment, still trying to get things out. But I did want to just mention their active participation at various points in time. Also, we had Nikki and Armand helping out at various points in time as well, particularly doing some deep reads of these things. The documents are very long, and it's a little bit mind-numbing, as you would, I'm sure, appreciate it as you go your way through them. So it is helpful just to have a few different pairs of eyes go over them. And of course, Joy as well, who did the heavy lifting on this project for a long time. So just turning now to the project proposal. Michelle, if you can just flip the slides. There we go. So again, and we did talk about this one in September, so I'll just give this a very high level review. The changes are arising from the finalization of the ISQMs. Now, for those of you who have been studying this conforming amendment exercise very closely, you'll note that there's a slight change in wording here. When we spoke to the board about this in September, we were talking about changes to arise from the finalization of the quality management standards. And we've tried to be a little bit more precise now by saying, well, the real driver of the change for these standards is actually ISQM1 and ISQM2. And that's in response to a comment that Kaiuwe made at the September meeting about the importance of not automatically just bringing over stuff from ISA 220. Of course, audits of financial statements are a very different animal to even reviews of financial statements or reviews of historical financial information if you're talking ISRE 2400. And they're very, very different to agreed upon procedures engagements, other related service engagements, 3000 level engagements. And so we have to be quite careful and deliberate about making a decision to alter the balance of those standards. So for that reason, we've tried to tighten up the project proposal to refer more directly to the ISQMs and give ISA 220, rather than saying there's an obligation to pull material in from ISA 220, it's rather that ISA 220 is an example of how engagement level quality control can work. And so the wording that's used to align with ISQM1 is interesting and useful to us. And you'll see at various points in the draft where we've pointed to areas where we've drawn the language from ISA 220, but you will note that we haven't drawn over everything from ISA 220 at all. ISA 220 is, an entire standard just on quality control, and most of these engagement standards have, perhaps 5 or 10 paragraphs on quality control. So they're a very different and much tighter and more high-level approach to quality control. The main goal of this project, and I'll just reiterate this one again, is to ensure that the IAASB's other standards can continue to be applied together with the ISQMs. And the main challenge that we have here is just making sure that we're removing inconsistencies, things that would create conflicts in practice. We're trying to make sure that you can use the two standards together. We're not trying to do a revision of the quality management practices in those other standards. That would be a wholly different and much more involved process. You really have to get your head into those standards and really think about what the objective is, who the users are of those standards, because it's not the same as the users of financial statements. That's a very different exercise and not the exercise that we're asking you to look at today. If there are changes that we need to consider that go beyond what we've got in the exposure draft and what we've got in the project proposal, then those are suggested that we would bring those up only as part of the framework for activity. So in other words, it goes into the pot with everything else that we've, other projects that we have under consideration but haven't yet formally started. Next slide, please. So the question for the board is, do you agree with the project proposal in agenda item 2A? And Tom, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. We agree with the agenda, the project proposal. I don't see many hands raised. Okay, let me do it this way. Who's, Josephine, you have a comment, or who supports the project proposal by show of hands? Okay. Just to confirm, put your hands down. I think we had unanimous support there. Wave your hands physically if you don't agree. Okay, we're good. We have unanimous support for the project proposal. Brett?
Wonderful. Shall I move on to the exposure draft itself?
Yes, please.
Okay. Next slide then, please. Okay, so maybe just to go into a little bit more detail on what Tom mentioned in his email last night and also this morning, just at the very start of the call. So we got, I think, 4 sets of comments from board members. Most of them were relatively straightforward. They're minor editorials. They're alignment questions, but they're of the, we've used one word here, we've used a slightly different word over here, and just asking questions as to why that's the case. We did get a late batch that came through yesterday that was kind of the one that really made me think we actually just physically can't get through the material. It's just such a long document that it's a little bit hard to work with, and certainly trying to do it on an accelerated basis. I got nervous that we were going to end up making a mistake just by trying to rush it too much. So for that reason, we decided to hold off on it. There aren't really a lot of really substantive issues being raised. Relatively, there's questions of why did you do this in 3000, but you did this in 2400. Those kinds of matters are being raised. We did get a couple, that the board members involved might wish to mention. Just some questions about whether the changes that we've made to add in material dealing with resources more broadly and dealing with the dating of the report when you have an engagement quality review. Those are new provisions that we've added to those standards. We did get some questions about those and whether or not these were changes that were absolutely necessary to happen to avoid conflicts. If you go back to the project proposal, that was the bar we set for ourselves. The short answer of these ones are, we're probably stretching the boundary here a little bit. We probably don't absolutely have to do them, but it just seems like such an obvious and necessary part of ISQM 1 and ISQM 2 that they cause no harm to add them, and they're a useful addition, probably to make life a little bit easier for firms not to have 2 different approaches to resources depending on which type of engagement you've got. And equally, the dating is actually governed by ISQM 2. If you've got an engagement quality review in place, then ISQM 2 has an obligation on the engagement partner sitting in ISQM 2. So whether we make the change or not won't actually alter the obligations in those standards. So with that one, we're proposing that we'll take those to we'll leave them in the exposure draft, but we will put a comment in the explanatory memorandum about them. We did also get a couple of people who flagged that we'd missed a paragraph or 2, so we needed to add those back in. So again, this was just something that we decided on balance that at one point, I think, and we'll probably remember this well, I think we were up to about a 20-page summary. Just because each of the paragraphs takes up a certain amount of space, and then you have to, explain why you're making the change. And 20 pages asking you to read that overnight for those people in the US just didn't seem like a fair request to make at the board. So that's the reason why we could defer. Just going back to the start of that slide, we'd only planned on releasing the exposure draft in January anyway. So we're not really going to be losing much. We'll probably end up losing a week or two, but we can still hit the date for the final approval in September next year. So what we will do is I'll turn in a moment and just ask if there are any sort of more substantive comments that people wish to make. And that will give us a good starting point for doing a quick turnaround of this document, and you'll have it sometime after the December board meeting, so well in advance of the board call in December. Next slide, please. So in terms of the what to do now, so if you do have any written comments, as Tom was saying, if there are any written comments that you were sort of wondering if you should send through, but you weren't quite sure, there is an opportunity to send those through up until next Monday, November 16th. We will circulate the revised text after the December meeting. And like I said, approval is still planned for January. So I'll just pause here, Tom, and just see if there are any substantive comments on the exposure draft itself.
Any comments, insights you want to share with Brad and the team? Of course, Eric.
The only question I had was around the review, the interim review standard, which is not being amended on the basis, I think it says, because you're worried that that might be seen as an updating process. I just queried that because it sounds like if it's an important thing to do, that we should do it. So maybe you could just give a bit more background on that one.
Okay, Brad.
Yep, thanks for that. The 2410 hasn't been updated. We haven't been touching it for quite some time now, and I can't remember the first time we decided to skip it, but it was at least 5 or 6 years ago. The difficulty is because it's in pre-clarity format, it hasn't been updated for a lot of things. It hasn't been updated when we did 2400, so it no longer works very well with some of those standards. There's some internal inconsistencies in terms of how we actually do things today. Now, that's not to say that it's a deficient standard in any way. It's just not reflective of how the rest of the standards are done. And so our concern has been all along that as soon as we start making changes to it, we give the impression that the standard is more up to date than it is. And so for that reason, we've been excluding it from the conforming amendment process. So in this case, the changes literally, these standards were written at a very different time by a board that had a very different approach to standard setting. It has one requirement dealing with quality control, and it literally just says should implement quality control procedures that are applicable to the individual engagement. And you'll notice I said should because it's that old. It doesn't even use shall. So if we change the quality control to quality management, in my mind, that's not the big issue. I think most people, when they read quality control, will still get the point as to what they need to do. There's not even a reference to ISQM1 in the standard. So from our point of view, it seemed that it was consistent with past decisions that it was best to leave it as it is.
Okay, any on that point? I see Rich, your hands up. Is your point on that? Is that a yes, Rich?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to just comment on that, but I have another point.
Come on in.
So just on that, I'm fine with the approach taken for this purpose. But clarity was what, 10 years ago. It seems that we are missing the boat by not, as part of our annual plans and planning over a period of time to update this standard. We say we have lots of things on our plate. I know we do. Things do seem to be coming a little more freer. But at some point, you got to bite the bullet and say, this is just not the same as any of the other standards, and we got to update it. So I would just encourage the new board to put this on the agenda so that we don't have to keep saying why it's not like the other standards. So that's one. The other thing, and there, I just wanted to raise so that there's a type of changes. So sorry, Brett, I'm sure you're referring to our submission that we gave yesterday, you know, with my holidays and stuff. It just took a while to get that through. We had, you know, a number of points, and I'll leave those to you and the group to make changes to them. There were two that maybe in our eyes rose a little bit higher. One was maybe it's an inconsistency, or maybe there's a different rationale, but in 3410 paragraph 71, you've deleted the requirement, but in 3000 you've the same requirement you've left but changed. And I would have thought the way you've done 3000 is the way to do the one in 3410. Again, maybe it's just an oversight because, as you said, there's 81 pages. There's, you know, there's lots of things. But if it wasn't just an oversight and a decision, I'm not sure I understand what that decision would be. The other comment was right at the back on 4400, where we've added everywhere client relationships. And I do understand where you picked that up in ISQM1, but looking at the context of 4400, which would be really the, you know, the add-on type of a engagement, it does seem strange to be saying you would, you know, back away from the entire client relationship. If there was an issue, you know, it would be more that you just wouldn't do that engagement. So to me, there might be cases where you bring client relationship and engagement, but I would have thought most of the cases you would just talk about engagement acceptance and not client relationship. So again, you don't need to respond to those two, but I wanted to give a little flavor of why we put those in there. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Brett.
Okay. Let me deal with the interim review question first. Because Rich, this is, as we've talked about in other contexts, is probably the one standard that COVID has exposed for needs that further updating is needed, and it's not already on our agenda. The team and I have been through significant planning exercises for the next, I think the schedule, if I remember, goes 3 years out with all the time and resources allocated to it. This is next to a couple of other projects, one of the top ones on the soon next to come on the list. The truth is that our time and our resources are fully called for in the not so distant future, but this is really sort of knocking on the door to come in, and depending upon resource priorities, you know, I wanted to create slack in our board agenda, and we just take it up all the slack when you add fraud, going concern, LCE, CUSP, down the list, and so it is right on the list as ones to come on, but that will require some resource free and time, particularly. One of the big constraints is just really board meeting time as well, because as long as we're in a virtual environment, we're losing board hours left and right. And we've managed with the current work plan, but we don't have as many board plenary hours as we did previously. So I hope that gives you some context. We're fully aware that this needs to come on to the work plan as soon as practicable. Vili, you have anything to add on that point before I let Brett respond to some of the specific questions?
I think, Tom, that summarizes the situation quite well. And I mean, this coming Monday, we actually taking to the planning committee the forward plan up to the end of 2022. And you're right, for the time being, it is in our category A bucket, and obviously one of those that we have highlighted as soon as work plan time opens up, it would be one of the projects we move there. But like you say, at the moment, it's a little bit of a difficult puzzle to fit.
Yeah. Okay. Brett, on the comments.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So the two comments you made, Rich, first of all, on 3410, paragraph 71, I'll have another look at it. And it was one of the ones that we were struggling a little bit to make a rapid decision on yesterday. If I can just maybe give the board a little bit of background more generally. That second volume of the handbook is a bit unusual because a lot of the standards are meant to operate in isolation. So they're standalone standards. The 3000 series is not standalone. 3000 is the base and the other standards all fit underneath it. So if you look through that 3000 series, you'll see a wide variety of how they deal with issues depending on how much the board at the time felt they needed to bring over from 3000. Now, the particular circumstance of 3410, it was actually finalized while the board was working on 3000, but it got finalized before 3000. So there was some material that was added to 3410, knowing full well that the board was going to do it for 3000, but at the time the board wanted to make absolutely sure it went into 3410. And I note that Roger was a chair or co-chair of 3410. I can't remember, it was a long time ago now, but so that's a paragraph that's probably not actually accomplishing anything because you would have to sit under 3000 anyway. So the 3000 obligation would apply. However, I will take it under advisement because consistent with our policy in this project of not changing anything that doesn't need to be changed, it's maybe one that we can revert without doing any harm. And then we're more consistent with the thrust of the project proposal. On the 4400 question you raised about whether client relationships is a valid thing to think about for acceptance and continuance decisions, let me take that one under advisement. I was studying it yesterday, and it is a little inconsistent the way it's dealt with through all those standards, and I think that inconsistency relates exactly to the point you were raising, which is some of those standards, some of those engagements are more consequential than others. And some of them are a bit more, you could take it or you could leave it. But I didn't want to just make a snap decision on that one. So we will take that one under advisement and come back.
Okay, any other comments on the conforming and consequential amendments? Okay, Brett, I think there are a couple of other questions you want to get some feedback on.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Next slide, please. Okay, so the remaining two questions for consideration are to do with the effective date and the exposure period. Let me just briefly do these and it'll just be one less thing we have to do in January. The effective date is essentially just going to be aligned to the effective date of the QM standards. And whenever we do conforming amendments, there's always this question of, well, when you say align to the effective date, do you mean, periods beginning on or after? In this case, I think we just need to line up with what ISQM1 has. In other words, it's going to go into effect as at the 15th of December 2022. So it'll be at a particular point in time. Now, there will be circumstances where that might mean that theoretically you can go down the rabbit hole and say, there's some extra requirement that's in there. But I think in practice, you're going to pick all those extra requirements up through ISQM1 anyway. So I don't think that's a significant concern. And for the exposure period, we're proposing that the exposure period be 90 days. Now, anyone who's a student of our due process will note that that's the minimum amount of time we're allowed to expose something for. Again, this is a very limited set of amendments. They're all, whilst the document itself is quite long, it's also very repetitive because it's the same amendments being made over and over again. So 90 days is the minimum that we're willing to do for something like this, noting that there are jurisdictions that will want to translate it. And so they need a minimum amount of time in order to do that. So the questions for you are, do you agree with the exposure period and do you agree with the effective date as outlined in the slide and in the issues paper?
Okay, thanks. I will ask by show of hands if anyone disagrees or has a comment in relation to these two questions? Okay, so let me just confirm for the record, raise your digital hand if you support the 90-day period and the effective date suggestion. I think we're unanimous on this one, Brett. So you've got had full support. So thank you all. I figured I'd preempt the formalities there. My guess was that there would be no objections to the proposed approach. And the other thing is, it should occur during a period where we don't have a significant amount of other consultations out there, which I think is helpful. Okay, lower your hands, everyone, unless you would like to speak. Josephine, is your hand up for a reason? Okay, perfect. Okay, Brad, I call you just to wrap up the conforming and consequential amendment discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Nothing further from me, but thank you for the support for the project proposal and also for these last two matters that we just dealt with. Again, sometimes when dealing with these kinds of conforming amendments, if it's helpful just to jump on a call, I'm more than happy to do that. Sometimes a 5-minute call can, vastly simplify all our lives. So more than happy to do that.
Okay. Before we turn to some concluding matters, I just want to ask if any of our observers would like to share any comments.
Thanks, Tom. It's Karen. I think this was a very good idea to give yourselves more time and not rush. Especially, I know how hard the staff works, and the quick turnarounds that have occurred in the past. So I think kudos to you for taking this action. And on the decisions of the board to do the project and the 90 days and the alignment of the effective date, I think the PIOB is in agreement with you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Karen. And Jim or Yosh? Okay. What I thought I would do, we're going to give you a lot of time back, so I'll be in real surplus. In other words, you owe me, which I don't think is the case at all. But what I thought we would do, there is a lot coming out in the next coming week. We're getting up to posted week for December. There are a number of things that are out there. I know it may, like everyone's sort of this mad dash to year ends right now. What I did think, though, it would be used for us to give you some transparency about what's coming out, what you should have right now, what's expected, and as I said in my note yesterday to you, the idea would be in the future is that maybe we have a running calendar of forthcoming attractions for 6 weeks, so you know what is going to hit your email boxes in the not so distant future. This is a comment that I've gotten in my feedback sessions with board members. We just have to execute on it. We do track it. We just have to put it in a form that will be useful for you. But Vili, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. So just maybe a quick update on forthcoming attractions, if we can call it that. So I think at the moment, in terms of open consultations, the only open consultations we have at the moment is the auditor reporting post-implementation review survey. And you will remember that we did actually extend the comment deadline for that one from October 23 to November 23. So we did actually extend it by a month. And I must say, we've actually already had a very, very good response to that survey. So I think we're going to get very good comments and rich comments to take into that project. The other one is the fraud and going concern discussion paper, which is, as you've seen in Tom's note, we've now decided to just extend a little bit to give people a little bit of breathing space in January. So those are with regard to open consultations. Then the next big event on our calendars are obviously the board meeting that's taking place from December 7 to December 11. So next week will be posting week. So we are aiming to have all the materials posted by next week Friday. We may have one or two that comes early, maybe around next week Wednesday, but we'll just see how it goes, because I think we're all experiencing that Q4 just feels very, very shorter than any of the other quarters. And so we still have a few working group meetings that are taking place this week. But we will certainly aim to have everything posted by next week Friday. So that will be for the LCE standard. It will be the project proposal for the separate LCE standard, as well as issues paper that deals with the first draft of the standard, and that's how we will use the time as allocated on the agenda. Then for audit evidence, we have a little bit less plenary time in December, but again, we'll ask for the approval of the project proposal, and there will also be time to discuss three of the issues that we think are sort of the foundational issues from that list that you saw in June, that we will be taking forward and share with the board the working group's initial views on those issues, and obviously get the board's direction on that. I'm sure that we're all very happy to see that we've got ISA 600 back on the agenda. So from here on, you can expect to see ISA 600 every board meeting up to the point where we intend to finalize the standard. So we'll get an update in terms of the what we've heard on exposure, high-level overview of what we've heard from the comment letters, and also they're bringing three key issues to the board in December. Lynn and Pauline and the EER task force has been working very, very hard. I know that they have had a number of back-to-back task force meetings, and we've sent out those 2 chapters to see if we can get some early comments. So again, Lynn will be bringing back a full revised draft of the guidance document with the idea of getting very good direction from the board, and then hopefully that will clear the path for us to approve the EER guidance in Q1 next year. And then you will also have the first opportunity to look at issues paper around our fraud project. This will be the first formal touch point. You remember a lot of work has been done by Bev and Angela and other team members around the information gathering and research for the fraud project. We've had roundtables, all of that. And the working group has now also started to meet and started to brainstorm on some of the first initial issues. So we will have a session on that as well. So Tom, actually, as I was speaking about this, I think I've now just basically determined that I don't need to send my normal email next week, because I've actually now said everything I wanted to say in the email, but it's fine. And so that's the board meeting coming up. With these board meetings, we really try to, because again, on feedback that we've received from board members and also from Tom speaking to individual board members, is that if at all possible, fit the board week into 1 week. And that's really what we're trying to do. I think while we're staying in the virtual environment, it becomes difficult in the instance where we have approvals, because you simply don't have enough time for all the turnarounds. But apart from that, we will really endeavor to make sure that we fit everything into 1 week. It may result, as for this upcoming board meeting, that on one of the days we might have dual sessions. But again, we will be very sensitive to that and try and minimize that as far as possible. The other session that you can look forward to is just before the board week, on that Thursday, December 3, we'll have an executive session. Now, the executive session will mainly be used for purposes of receiving a report back from the Accounting Standards Board. Mary Tokar will speak to us and update us You will remember normally we will do that in a public session, but we just ran out of time this year, and this is the best time we could find for Miri to just speak to the board and update the board on the accounting standards agenda and some of their projects coming up, including they've got an agenda consultation that they're also doing at the beginning of next year. Then we will use a short bit of time, and we are busy putting an agenda together, so that will go out to the board. We will use also a few minutes in the executive session just to talk about the transition from the steering committee to a planning committee. You'll remember that was something that Tom drove at the end of last year. We've been engaging with the planning committee at various stages during this year, and we've also cleared it with the PIOB. So we just wanted to update the board on where we landed there, and also share with you the updated planning committee charter that will in essence replace the steering committee in terms of reference. And then lastly, that executive session will be used for discussion around the monitoring group recommendations. Initially, it was planned as a session where Tom and James Gunn would have updated the board on the monitoring group developments, the transition plans that are being put together, and the various work streams that are being attended to. But what has transpired in the last few weeks is that the new PIOB chair, Linda de Beer, will actually also come into that executive session and speak to the board on the monitoring group recommendations, also from a PIOB perspective, which we thought would be very helpful to the board. So that is the executive session coming up on December 3. And then the last thing is then obviously a little bit more lighthearted, and maybe the right thing to put us in the right mood for the December holidays is the week after the board week. On December 16, we will have a very informal executive session where we will say goodbye and farewell to our 3 board members that are rotating off, who are Rich, Bob, and Fiona. And you can bet that seeing that Fiona is taking care of 2 of those farewells, that it will certainly be something not to be missed. So, so that's, I think, Tom, that's all I've got on my sort of attraction list. I hope I've made it very interesting and that you're all looking forward to it. Just the papers for the board, you will see, because of the stages for the board meeting, the stages of projects like LCE, audit evidence at the beginning, going through a lot of issues, there is going to be a lot of paper, but we will try and set up the issues paper in such a way that we also guide you through that paper, so you know where to focus your attention. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Any comments, reaction, desires for clarification? Billy, I fully expect the note and some creativity in the note to tell us some tidbits or some amusing insights that we haven't already heard in your summary here. So that's a coming attraction for me. Anyone else? Any comments? Just we're trying to, as I said, we're trying to do our best to give you a better preview of what's coming up, because we're fully aware that this is not your only job out there. In fact, it's your volunteer job. So thanks. Rich?
And maybe I missed it, but so first, very helpful for Billy to set out what's coming forward for the next few weeks. Have to say, I have been worried a bit about what Fiona might say in December. So being reminded to be worried isn't the best thing for me. But the one thing that, like I said, I'm not sure if I missed, Tom, was the schedule or forward-looking agenda of staff issued documents or working group issued documents. As we talked about, there are definitely some, and some of those, a lot of those come through the board in one way or another, but some of those don't, and not knowing about that does put us at a bit of a surprise to our network and to our stakeholders. And I think having at least an understanding of what's coming out, and hopefully a view what goes out before it goes out would be useful. Thanks.
So, yeah, I think that's what we're talking about, would be part of our sort of look forward document and managing it. And, you know, we're trying to phase the release too. Honestly, the clip of all the stuff you've done was actually our best attempt, considering how much was out there to manage it. But Billy, you have any further perspective on that?
And I fully take Richard's point. I think that is part of also going forward. You know, you also learn as you go along, and so we will pay closer attention to that. I think currently the only I was trying to think now, but actually I don't think there will be any staff documents coming to the board between now and the end of the year. The last one was the technology communique that we asked for no objection to be issued review. And then the others is simply with is the basis for conclusions that was distributed yesterday. So I think for this year we're done in terms of any staff documents that we will be asking the board to review. Tom, I just thought the one thing that I should maybe mention is okay. Sorry, I just got a Teams message here from Bev that says that the one thing maybe, and we'll just see how we go, is there might be one or two things around the 315 implementation guidance. Remember, the 315 implementation guidance would have gone out a little bit earlier, but that is really just when the whole lockdown happened and our focus moved to getting some of the COVID changes out and so on. So there may be one or two things, but to Rich's point, I think what you're asking for is just a little bit of a heads up, and that we allow you sufficient time to look at that. The other thing that I just wanted to flag to the board is, you will remember when I circulated the dates for next year, and specifically dates for the board calls, we put in your calendars the call for January 26th. That one will go ahead, and we also put in your calendars again back-to-back calls in February that will work similarly to what we had this week with the call yesterday and the call today. And then for the remainder of the year, we put in a day per month between the board weeks, as we normally do. That would have been the normal board calls. But you remember, I also indicated that we deliberately try, I think there's one exception for purposes of a religious holiday, but for all the others, we've planned them on a Wednesday, so that if it works out, depending on how long we're still going to be in a virtual environment, that we may need more plenary time, we can then either use the Tuesday or the Thursday to also convert that into a back-to-back call to make up for some time. So we're having a discussion at the planning committee this Monday to look at the forward plan. So off the back of that, I may come back to the board and just indicate to you which of those we already know may be converted into back-to-back calls, where we're going to use 2 days for each of those calls. But I'll have more certainty about that after the planning committee meeting next week.
Okay. Imran, I saw you had your hand up, but maybe we answered your question.
Tom, given the opportunity, I was going to really congratulate Willie on putting the gauntlet down to Fiona to say that that farewell event is not to be missed. I think it's appropriate that the technical director puts pressure on the deputy chairman.
we are certain that Fiona, knowing her, will rise to the occasion. And also now we know she'll come bearing gifts, 315 implementation guidance. So that's her part of shot towards us too.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Okay. Any other thoughts or comments? I thought it would be good just to have Billy here. We had some time to sort of get your minds about it. Can't believe that we're already preparing for the December board meeting. In fact, not only preparing, the posted is ready to go as we speak. Okay. I guess I'll bring it to a close unless anyone has any other comments or questions on anything related to IAASB business. I'm sure those in New Zealand and Australia or Singapore are anxious to get off the call, considering the hour of the day it is. So thank you all for being here, for joining us again 2 consecutive days. A lot's happening. We know a lot's happening on your plate too, in your day job. So appreciate it. Thank you to the staff for all you're doing right now as well. We know it's not easy, and managing, as I said, you guys have the ultimate cat herding job. So thank you for herding us cats. So keep up the great work, and I'll speak to everyone soon. So speak to you soon, and have a good rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.